Welcome to our conversation on how collaboration is so key. In this case, working with victim service professionals in our intimate partner violence cases. As always, really happy to be here with my friend and colleague, Patti Powers.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Patti. So both of us are honored to work as attorney advisors with Equitas. Equitas is an organization, a nonprofit that's funded through various federal and private foundations and grants to provide you guys with innovative, informed, and hopefully very practical strategies that you can apply to your work right away. We do that in a couple of different ways, including resources like this recorded series that you can find on our website, along with articles, research, statutory compilations. Patti and I do a lot of training around the country, both virtually and in person. And we do everything from, an office-wide training to multidisciplinary teams, to regions, states, national conferences, and a few international things as well. We really enjoy, and I'll speak personally, but I can pretty confident Patti will agree with me that one of our favorite things to do is to work directly with you guys that are in the field doing the work to provide you case-specific support, whether that be working as a sounding board for you as you are thinking through a strategy or jury selection questions that you might need, or if you need some specific research as well. Equitas is also really proud to work on a variety of initiatives and through various partnerships to provide long-term support that is built for sort of changing systems or improving systems or supporting new and innovative programs such as our Innovative Prosecution Solutions Grant, our Enhanced Collaborative Model Human Trafficking Task Forces, and also our Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, working on some of the untested sexual assault kits and responses to those that have now been tested and are being prosecuted as cold cases. And Patti takes the lead on that project. So really happy to have her here as we talk about how key it is. And I know we could even sort of reference back, because when we talk about the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative and intimate partner violence, that collaboration I know is so key. So feel free to follow us on any of our social media platforms or our website, which is www.equitasresource.org. Our work is supported by the Office on Violence Against Women, this series in particular, although not everything that we say is necessarily reflecting the views of the department. We always want to bring you the most informed, innovative, and up-to-date information, and oftentimes we'll be sharing other resources under the Fair Use Doctrine. So today our conversation is really hopefully going to be on different variety of levels, like how can you, in whatever role you're at in your office or how far you are in your career, how you can enhance collaboration with victim service professionals who are supporting the victims that you're serving through your prosecution. And one of the ways to do that is to know about the services that are available in your communities and to provide survivors and victims with meaningful access to those services and the appropriate services for them. And always as a conversation when we talk about our work with victim service professionals, one of the things that comes up a lot is confidentiality. So we'll also talk about how we can ethically protect victim privacy through this collaboration. So welcome, Patti. I know that you probably have seen this graphic a lot. I think you shared that you were a prosecutor for 27 years, and most of your work has been in the fields of sexual assault and domestic violence, intimate partner violence, where this victim-centered approach is so necessary and key.
It is. It's such an important dimension of our work, Jane. It really is a pleasure to have this chance to talk about it. The victim, as depicted on this graphic, is the heartbeat of our work. That's why we do what we do. And we really have learned over time and experience how important it is to come together as a multidisciplinary team. One profession by itself is not able to meet all of the needs that a victim may have and do the work that is necessary to holding offenders accountable for their conduct. But it's what we do together that is so meaningful and also can bring success to our work with victims. So when we look at this, we know that many victims have chosen or are choosing to retain attorneys. They have that right, and it's a very important exercise of their right. And as you can see, we all have the opportunity to work with the victim's attorney. We're also working with law enforcement. Prosecutors in particular will be in touch with law enforcement, may offer ideas for follow-up based upon information that we're gathering. But it certainly is a team approach. Victim witness professionals, both community-based and systems-based, are also very important members of our team who do work that's critical to supporting victims and enhancing our efforts as multidisciplinary professionals. Medical professionals also in the care that they provide to victims and also the support that they provide throughout the process are also critical members of the team. So really the message is it takes all of us to do this work for victims to advance these cases to justice.
And I'm using this sort of generic term or umbrella term of victim service professional, but we could see that role in a variety of ways, and it might be different names in your community or in your office and what you refer to folks that are doing this really important work. So I wanted to give a couple of examples here and maybe go through how these terms are sometimes commonly used or differentiated from one another.
No, it's a really important focal point, victim service professionals, because everyone depicted on this particular slide does provide service and support to victims. We have differing responsibilities, all of which are very important. Sometimes victim witness professionals are known as counselors. Sometimes they may be known as advocates. In some offices, they may even have the designation of paralegals with these particular responsibilities. So we need to ensure that we know what everyone's responsibility is so that we can understand their role in supporting victims. A victim service coordinator may have the overall responsibility of coordinating efforts made by other members of the staff, and in some offices may also become involved in supporting victims in certain kinds of cases. Victim specialists as well have other roles. In some offices, they may be providing information about the progression of a case. Other offices, they may have more of an advocacy or support role. A case manager may have the capacity to coordinate and secure the efforts of others in a holistic approach to victim support. Medical professionals, we don't always think of them as victim service professionals, but they truly are. Their responsibility is to provide care to their patient who in the criminal justice system is known as a victim. And that care may be initial care. There can also be follow-up medical care as well, which is very important. And attorneys also provide, I believe, invaluable victim support in the work that we're called upon to do, whether we're representing victims in the criminal justice system or whether we're prosecutors advancing this case to justice. So I'm glad we have a chance to talk about the different roles and responsibilities, because as prosecutors, this is information that we need to have so that we can coordinate the fullest amount of support for victims in our work.
And I think it's really important, even on sort of an entry level. I started my career as a misdemeanor prosecutor in our domestic violence unit in the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, and obviously a really large office, and was very lucky to work in a designated unit, 25 dedicated prosecutors doing this work. And I remember, I'm sure they did a great job of on the outset, like telling us who was who in the office, and within our Family Justice Center, there were some other folks that were co-located in the building. And I think, you know, it kind of flew over my head when I was first learning, you know, everything that you learned when you started to being a prosecutor. And I had a hard time figuring out, okay, who is this person? What is their role? Who is this person? You know, if my victim tells me this, what's the right person to ask? Luckily, those victim service professionals all knew each other, and they knew all that better than I ever did. But I started to learn as I got more confident and comfortable that I should be asking those questions. Even if, you know, I'm at that level of my career, I should start getting to know who is who. And because that made me better able to point people in the right direction. So, you know, what are some of these questions that you want to be asking?
Yeah, and this really illustrates the questions we can ask and the information that we need to do our work as prosecutors even better. And the first distinction I think that's very important to talk about is the difference between a systems-based and a community-based advocate. In particular, in many jurisdictions, prosecutors' offices have systems-based advocates. They work with prosecutors directly. They're subject to Brady disclosures, as an example. Community-based advocates have a confidential relationship, which is governed by statute in most jurisdictions. But we need to know what the difference is, because it's going to really impact our working relationships with them and the information that we would expect from them. We may not obtain information from a community-based advocate unless their client, our victim, is indicating that that information should be provided. And we do have an expectation of information from a systems-based advocate. And so we might want to find out in our conversation with advocates where their confidentiality comes from and how that governs their relationship. And I think it's a really good question to ask, because it really shows our respect for their work in wanting to understand the restrictions that there might be, that they may have in sharing information. And one thing I think that's especially important for prosecutors is to get to know the community. And when we do, we're able to know all the more about the resources that are available for victims. What is the capacity for service? Are men served as well as women in this organization? How about LGBTQ individuals or persons with disability? Is this a by and for organization that may have survivors at the helm and involved in the service? These are all questions that we need to ask, and it really is going to help inform how we work with our victims and the kinds of referrals that we know will be possible in our community.
Yeah, and I think I started when I was doing human trafficking work, which really, you know, was an evolution from the work I was doing in the domestic violence sphere. It became more and more important for me to be thinking about not just here is a referral, but is this the best referral for you? And what else is available in our community? Because I started really recognizing that victims responded to peer support, folks that they could look at and say, sometimes, you know, you look like me, or you've had an experience like me. You've gone through this, you know, what it's like, and that support that they could provide. And so sort of trying to uplift organizations that are very intentional about being by and for the people that they serve. And the last question on here as well, which is, even if the organization isn't, you know, survivor led, or it should be survivor informed. And I think the services need to be able to articulate, this is how we have continued to have input from survivors and have evolved our services, or this is why we do what we do. This is because survivors have given us this feedback. There should be some element of that in the services that we're referring victims to. So those are, I think, are important questions, and they may be above your pay grade at some level, but I think it's important even at the beginning of your career to be thinking about this, because victim services, such an important referral. But for example, a systems-based advocate that's working within a law enforcement agency or within a prosecution agency, they have access to lots of other services. They have a keen ability to share like what to be expected in the system, but they don't have a confidential relationship. And we know that victims and survivors often will need that confidential relationship to really feel fully supported in the system. So being able to say, okay, you've got these system-based people that are supporting you on this level, but let's also connect you with community-based, and to think about not just, okay, here's one referral. That might not be enough. But I also realized that a lot of people were like, oh, I'm a victim service counselor, and I thought they were counseling the person. But that can be a term of art used to describe somebody that's role is really to inform the victim, to provide the victim with referrals, and they're not actually providing what I would refer to as direct services of, counseling. So it's important to get to the heart of some of these questions, so you better understand who you're working with and who else is working in your community.
We should also make the point that this information can also be enriching in another way. The more that we come to know about these organizations and the professionals who work in them, we might be learning potentially about expert witnesses who can help us out based upon their experience in providing this service. So we really do have some important considerations to ask these questions to get this information.
Because then we'll be like, oh, wow, you do that. I didn't know that. Maybe I should come, maybe we should do a training together, or have you come in and train the prosecutors, because we don't know anything about this service. And so this collaboration, it's kind of two-sided. I was just looking at this, and it looks like we're butting heads. And I actually want to say the opposite. We're coming together. We're working together. So let's get off that. Here's some of the ways that working as a prosecutor, working with a victim service professional can really enhance our work. So if you don't mind going through a couple of these with us.
Sure. And really the benefits are just immeasurable in this kind of collaboration that Jane and I are talking about. It really is going to enhance our communication with the victim. We're receiving input from fellow professionals who have experience in working with victims and understand many of the barriers to a victim's communication. So we're able to learn really on better ways perhaps to build trust and rapport with specific victims. And it's so important to bear in mind that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Victims come from different backgrounds, different walks of life. They're impacted by trauma in a myriad of different ways. So learning as much as we can from fellow support professionals can really enrich our ability to work with victims. We're able to talk about services that are available if a victim needs or desires these services. As I mentioned just a moment ago, so we might be talking to future expert witnesses. We're not going to call an expert as a witness who's currently providing services to a victim, but they may be able to tell us about experts who aren't involved with this victim, or even from other jurisdictions who might be able to testify. Talking about safety planning is so important. And this is the work of many victim advocates who come to know a victim on a very personal level and are able to understand and relate to the fears and the safety concerns that victims have, and are authorized community-based advocates to address those concerns with us, or systems-based or victim witness professionals who can, again, share that information from the victim and assist us in safety planning. And as part of safety planning, we want to make sure that we are focused on any potential of witness tampering or intimidation that may come about in this case. The first question that I'm sure we're all asking is, well, how do we know if it's going to? Well, we know that especially in intimate partner violence cases, there is a definite potential for tampering or intimidation. An offender wants to maintain control. They didn't want the victim to make the disclosure to walk out of that control relationship, and they want to stop the disclosure, to stop the participation in the criminal justice system, and in some way to silence the victim, to take away the victim's voice. So it's so important that a victim has our support and advocacy support if they make that choice as well. And all of us together will talk about signs and symptoms that might cause concern for an offender trying to exert this kind of control.
Mhm. So there are some common tension points because we do have distinct, we might have a common mission, common goals, but we do have distinct roles and responsibilities that we need to acknowledge, and they sometimes come up in some common tension points. So I was hoping you could work through, these are the three that I identified, one being confidentiality, one being, how we make our charging decisions, maybe what our burden of proof is, why we go forward on cases sometimes and not. And then also discovery, what our obligations are and what limitations we have sometimes to protect victims' privacy when something is discoverable. So that's what I've ID'd. I don't know where you want to start, Patti.
Well, I think the primary point that we really want to talk about is communication with fellow professionals. And that's why exploring confidentiality, if there is confidentiality in that relationship, it's really important for us to know that. If we're working with a community-based advocate, as an example, by and large, most of their communications are confidential, and they're usually governed by statute in just about every jurisdiction. And so we want to read that statute to see what the parameters of confidentiality are. And we can understand that the confidentiality right belongs to the victim. And the victim is the person who can waive that if they decide to reach that decision. A victim can tell a community-based advocate that they would like to share certain information with the prosecutor, and safety concerns might be one of them. So it's really important to know that and to respect the work that professional is doing, even though we may not be aware of the substance of the work and the communication. We can honestly respect that is being done and that their commitment is to the best interests of the victim. That's really important to all of us. And at the same time, a systems-based advocate is going to provide us information about their contact with the victim and help us to improve our insight into the work that we're doing with the victim. Systems-based advocates certainly are going to share with the victim that information that they provide to them is going to be provided to the prosecutor. And that's also an important communication that's had. When we get to charging decisions, communication is, again, huge. It's so important for us as prosecutors to discuss our charging decisions with victims if they want to have this conversation. And you'll notice Jane and I keep going back to what the victim desires to do or what the victim wants to do. And a victim may or may not want to discuss a charging decision. That's the decision that they get to reach, but we need to let them know transparently that we are available to discuss that and to listen to their input. And sometimes we might even hear additional information from a victim that can make a difference in that charging decision. So it's a very important conversation. And then we get to the area of discovery. Community-based advocates, as we know, are in a confidential relationship with the victim. That's not the same with systems-based. And the systems-based advocate may work for law enforcement or they may work in a prosecutor's office. And a lot of training is ongoing about conveying information to the prosecutor, especially in the area of Brady and Giglio. This is information that is material or exculpatory, or can also be used for impeachment, or can impact a sentencing decision. And when we talk about this, I think the conversation that we can all have together is how important the truth is, and how important it is to convey full discovery to the defense so that they can prepare a diligent defense of their client and certainly be part of advancing justice for all of us. But when we have this discussion with advocates, particularly system-based advocates, we need to ensure that we're all on the same page about the nature of information that we're required to present to the defense. We want to be in a position where all of that information is channeled directly to the prosecutor, and that we can make those necessary disclosures. So when we look at all of these, potentially, there are some tension points, but the overlay of communication, I think, is going to help all of us as professionals really navigate through the involved issues.
Absolutely. And I think the other point I would just make is that that communication is ideally occurring before the tension arises.
Yes.
Before we've now got to deal with, this particular case, we're having conversations about what our roles and responsibilities are, what our, what the limits sometimes of our powers are. So for example, with discovery, we're having that conversation about what is discoverable, but we can also have a conversation about, here are some tools that I have to maybe protect the privacy of the victim beyond what is absolutely necessary. So protective orders or redactions. And so to have those conversations as well. So ongoing, early and ongoing and transparent. So we've talked a lot about what victim service providers do to benefit our work and benefit victims. What can we as prosecutors do to help them improve how they serve victims? And I think we've kind of touching on it a little bit when we talk about this communication.
I think that a prosecutor can provide invaluable information about the nature of the work that we do, about reaching charging decisions and what laws govern those charging decisions. One question that many victims have, particularly in states where there are degrees of crimes, is why wasn't this first degree, if that's the most serious one? But providing information about the applicable laws regarding charging decisions can also be important, and about the process that we're involved in the criminal justice system. After the charges are made, there's going to be an arraignment in many jurisdictions, or an indictment in some other jurisdictions. The defendant may bring a bail motion, and we're going to let you know when that happens so that you can ensure that the victim has that information and can decide whether or not they want to appear. A pretrial hearing is going to come up, and these are the issues that we're going to work on. Talking about scheduling. I think this is so important, because if victims choose to be present at any of the hearings that we're conducting, they should be present. And all too often, cases are scheduled without accessing the victim and the victim's advocate schedules. They might be out of town. They have lives outside of our work on the case. And so frequently, scheduling decisions are made with the attorneys and the court in mind. So we need to make sure that our fellow professionals and the victim also have notice, and that we try to make things convenient for them also. But this is just part of an even larger conversation that we can have with advocates to provide them information that really is going to enable them to answer questions that we all know a victim is likely going to have.
Recognizing that a victim will often go to this victim service professional first with their questions. They may feel more comfortable. They've spent more time together. No matter how much trust and rapport we've built as prosecutors directly with the victim, there still might be an intimidation factor. I don't want to bother the prosecutor. So we know these questions are going to go to the victim service professional. And so to be able to help them do their job of supporting the victim by providing them with this communication, with this, just almost like a cross training of here's what a case looks like, just how they're going to cross train us on, common victim behaviors and those things that their expertise really, bring to our work, which was the other thing I wanted to say here. And it's kind of a bit of a plug, which is that Equitas has done a lot of work with victim service providers and with prosecutors to build capacity within jurisdictions for expert witness testimony. Because victim service professionals often will qualify as experts on things like victim behavior, common responses to trauma. They may not immediately think they are because they're very humble in the work that they do. But many of them may want to serve as expert witnesses, and prosecutors and victim service professionals can work together, and Equitas can help build that capacity. And we often will put on trainings where the training is victim service professionals and prosecutors both learning a little bit more about how this type of expert testimony can be used. What are the legal requirements? And we'll do a little mock testimony going through qualifications and arguments. So that would be another plug I'd give here, that prosecutors and victim service professionals can also work together to build that expert capacity, which many people really would like to do because they know it's such an effective tool in our intimate partner violence cases, which we talked about in another member of this series, but we can't talk about experts enough when it comes to these types of cases. So hopefully moving forward, you and your role can identify within that role these opportunities to collaborate with victim service professionals to learn more about who is doing what in your community to serve victims, and then perhaps even build on some referral networks. And then overall, that communication being so incredibly key to build trust between prosecutors and victim service professionals, and to overcome those tension points that do frequently come up and that can be sort of minimized and assuaged if we're having these early communications and being very open about our roles and responsibilities. And then to leverage those collaborative relationships and to work really, hopefully very well together with the common mission of enhancing victim safety and our mission of hopefully having victims feel safe enough emotionally and physically to participate in the prosecution along with us. So this is all my contact information, Equitas's website. You can get a hold of Patti through myself and the website as well. I want to put a plug in before I say goodbye to Patti for Equitas's office hours. We host these the third Thursday of every month, an opportunity for prosecutors around the country, most of whom are going to be working in these types of cases: intimate partner violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, stalking. And you can share resources, emerging trends. Usually there's a topic of conversation that's guiding the office hours, but it's really an opportunity to connect and to have a sort of nationwide sounding board with your peers. And you can register on our website. So thanks so much. Thank you, Patti.
Thank you.
And have a good one.